Welcome to the Art of Teaching Yoga. My name is Wenlin and I'm your host for today. Today I'm sharing with you an interview with expert yoga teacher, Bernie Clark. So Bernie is the creator of yinyoga.com and he has authored several books which include Your Body, Your Yoga, Your Spine, Your Yoga, as well as the complete guide to Yin Yoga, all of which are really great reads and I highly recommend them. Bernie himself has been traveling the yogic path for over 35 years, and he began with a daily meditation practice in his early 20s. So that was to help to deal with the stresses in his business career at that time. In his early 40s, he was then introduced to the physical practice of yoga asana through hatha yoga, which really assisted him greatly in his meditation practice. He holds a degree in science and spent 30 years as a senior executive in the high-tech space industry. But he also continues to feed his intense curiosity about psychology, mythology, anatomy, and philosophy. And these culminated in the various books he has written. So I'll share more about his work and where you can find out about that towards the end of the episode. Without further ado, the interview with expert yoga teacher Bernie Clark. Welcome, Bernie. Good morning.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah. Bernie, for those viewers who are still fairly new to you and have not been so familiar with your work, I just wanted to quickly just run through for Bernie. He's a very prolific Yin Yoga teacher. And today I wanted to focus a little bit of the discussion around your journey. For example, how you began, because I understand that you began your journey through yoga starting with Zen meditation, right? Could you share a little bit more about this?
Sure. Yeah, I didn't know it at the time, but meditation is a big part of yoga. And I took up meditation in my early 20s. This is the late 1970s, to deal with stress in business. My business career was very stressful. So for about 20 years, I was just practicing Zazen. And I eventually, in the mid 90s, I joined a Sangha, a center that was both a yoga center and a Zen center. Mm-hmm. And the owner kept telling me I should try the yoga as well. And I'd only been doing the meditation. That's all I was interested in. But she convinced me eventually that the yoga would help my meditation practice. So I started to add the asana practice and found out that meditation is part of yoga and yoga is all meditation. It was all part of the same journey. So I kind of came into it a little bit later.
I see. So did you find that in the beginning, yoga did really help your meditation practice, help you be able to sit longer in meditation?
Well, actually, she got me to try the yoga because she promised me it would help my golf game. And I was an avid golfer, and golf is very Zen-like in a way of a sport. And the asana practice or the yoga definitely did help my golf game. But not so much because it gave me more flexibility, but because it taught me how to relax. During the periods of a stress, if you have a stressful putt to make to win a tournament, to be able to relax your shoulders, relax your arms, relax your breath, that I found to be the biggest gift that yoga gave my golf practice. But it's all meditation as well, just being in the moment, being mindful, paying attention, making clear what you intend to do, and then pay attention to what you're doing.
That's a great point that you mentioned, and you also emphasize that a lot in your books, like being paying attention, being clear with your intention, and then from then on knowing what to pay attention to. Could you share a little bit with our viewers a little bit more about that, and how this applies to both for us as practitioners of yoga and also as yoga teachers, how this applies to our guidance, like guiding our students?
Yeah. Well, it's encapsulated there's two broad methods for doing asana practice. There's the aesthetic approach, where you're focused on where your body is in space, like where should your feet be, where should your hands be, and how you look is very important. But the other broad approach is called the functional approach. In the functional approach, you have an intention for the pose. Like, why are you doing warrior pose? Why are you doing down dog? And usually the intention is to create some sort of exercise or load or stress in a particular targeted area. And that's your intention. So I'm doing down dog because I want to strengthen my upper body, or I want to stretch the back of my legs. So you have that intention, and then you pay attention. Are you getting a stretch in the back of the legs? Are you working your upper body? So you combine both these elements of an intention. From a functional approach to yoga, you have an intention for every pose, including a targeted area that you want to stress. And then you pay attention. Am I doing it? And if you're not, then you have to modify the pose in some way that you can get the sensations in the desired areas. Whereas in the aesthetic practice, you're not really looking for how the pose feels, you're looking for how the pose looks. And it's easier to teach that way because you can get the whole class all looking exactly the same. Have the knee pointing over the second toe, not the third toe, it's gotta be right over the second toe, and you get 20 students all looking exactly the same, and you think you've done your job. But those 20 students are all having 20 different experiences. And some of them are working their thigh strength, and some are stretching the inner groins, and some aren't. But how do you know? Since you're judging by how everyone looks, and you're not asking them, how are you feeling? Or what are you feeling? Then you don't know if they're really doing what you intended the pose to give them. So I prefer to teach from a functional approach, which starts with an intention, and then you teach the student how to pay attention to make sure they're getting the sensations in the desired area.
Right. And it's really clear how you explained it. For example, the aesthetic approach, like, you know, aligning your heel with certain part, like maybe the second toe. How would a cue like that comes from a functional approach sound like, you know, for an example, if a new yoga teacher were to begin to try to cue or to guide his or her students to listen and to feel in your body, what would, you know, how can they begin to approach that?
Well, first recognize that a lot of students, when they first start doing yoga, they have no introspection ability. Introspection means knowing what's happening on the inside. Proprioception is knowing where the body is in space. So we're limited in both where we are, but also what we're experiencing. And if you ask a beginning yoga student, what are you feeling? They'll probably say, fine. And you'll smile and say, I'm glad you're feeling fine, but that's not what I asked you. I asked, what are you feeling, not how are you feeling? And then you may explain to them, okay, we're doing down dog, and the intention I have for you for down dog today is to feel like this is really strengthening your upper body and stretching the hamstrings and the calves. Are you feeling anything in the back of your legs? So now you've drawn their awareness inside, not to the outside, like where are my legs, how far are my feet apart, how far are my hands apart, where are my hands pointing, where are my feet pointing? You're asking, what are you feeling? What are you feeling in the hamstrings, in the back of the calves? So now you're starting to give them an ability to feel their own bodies. And if they're not feeling anything, maybe you want to shorten it up a bit. That'll be more stretchy. Like in a long dog, it's more upper body strength. There's not so much lower body length there. In a shorter dog, there's not so much upper body strength building, but there's more stretch. And if your intention is, I'm going to really work the stretching the back of the legs, you might say, okay, well, let's shorten it up a bit. Now that may not be the aesthetic, because the aesthetic is you want a nice equilateral triangle down dog. And I might make it more into a narrow down dog. Or if I'm working for strength, I may make it a longer down dog. So there is no ideal dog. And as I like to say, every dog will have its day. So you can let the students play around with that.
Right. And that's really the beauty of yoga, that, you know, it's what purpose it is for, right? I wanted to understand a little bit more. So because in your very famous book, Your Body, Your Yoga, you emphasize a lot about skeletal variation. And this also closely ties in with the practice of Yin Yoga as well. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about skeletal variation, how this applies to giving cues and guiding students inside their bodies, and you know, as well as the practice of Yin Yoga?
Sure. Well, just before I dive into skeletal variation, it's also important to answer a little mantra, a little question. What stops me? When you come to a pose and you can't go any further, you ask yourself, okay, what's stopping me? And the answer is either going to be tension or compression. Now, tension is a resistance of the tissues to elongation. Like if I'm trying to open my arm and I can't, maybe I have tension in my biceps and I need to stretch that out. But after a few months or a few years of your yoga practice, you'll eventually work through the tension. Now what stops you may be compression. Now the bones are hitting the bones, and no amount of yoga is going to change that. So it's important to know what's stopping me. And that tells you, can I keep going? Should I keep trying? Or should I accept I've reached the limit? So once you've known that, Then you have to say, okay, well, some people stop here. They can't straighten their arms because of the shape of the bones. Some people stop with the arm going way down. They're called hyperextending the elbow.
Extension, yeah.
But not, yeah, let's see yours.
Yeah, mine
Show us
is.
your elbow again.
I've
Yeah,
super
so, but
hyperextended.
you go to where the bones hit. And it
Yeah,
happens to be more extended than I can go.
yeah.
But that's your limit. And knowing that, that's going to mean that you have different alignments depending on the nature of your bones.
Mm.
For example, in Your Body, Your Yoga, it's really focused, that volume is focused on the lower body. And we discovered that our feet are neutral when they're slightly pointing away from each other because of something called tibial torsion. The tibia has a slight twist to it. Some people have a little twist, some people have a lot of twist. So some people, when their hips are neutral, their feet are pointing slightly out. Some people, the feet are pointing way out. And if we try to bring the feet parallel, well, that has to come from the hips. You have to internally rotate. Some people hate forward folding when they internally rotate because now the hip is impinging on the top of the femur and it kind of pinches in there. But if you let them roll their feet out a bit, now they're neutral, they've got no impingement. So because of the variations in the skeletons we have, what works for one alignment for one student is not going to work for another student. So the idea that there's one alignment, the feet must be pointing straight ahead, is flawed. It may work for you, it may work for 10 people in your class, but it may not work for the other 10 people because of the shape of their bones is such that in order to give you that aesthetic, they've had to do something at the hips or at the shoulders that takes them out of the neutral alignment. Now, alignment is important. I'm not anti-alignment. I'm just anti-universal alignment. There are no alignment cues that works for everybody. So instead, as a teacher, you're gonna have to figure out how can I teach my students to find out what their alignment is? And that comes from experimenting. Let them be like this, let them be like this, let them be halfway, and find out what works best for them. And they can decide what's the proper alignment for their feet or their hands or the arms or the legs or the knee.
Thank you, thank you. This has been really just amazing. And it makes me think back to a conversation that I heard with Donna, and she mentioned like how she realized there was some injury in her shoulder, and that's why her dog, her downward facing dog, is not exactly in a neutral position with both arms. And this ties in, I think, very nicely with one of the recent articles you wrote in your newsletter that uses the title Beware the Binary. Could you share a little bit more about this and how this applies to not just on the mat, but also in life as well?
Sure, that's a fairly big topic, but people tend to think that if something is bad for you, then never do anything. Like if you hyperextend your elbow, that's bad. Therefore, never hyperextend your elbow. They make it into a binary. And they have good intentions. I don't want you to hurt yourself. So when you hyperextend your elbow, I can't do that. If I was to do that, I'd break my elbow. But I don't have your bones. When you do it, you go to where the bones naturally hit. But I bet you've had a lot of teachers over your yoga career telling you not hyperextending your elbow.
Yes.
Give us a micro bend. Right? So they're afraid that you're going to hurt your elbow. But in your experience, does it hurt?
No,
when you
never.
Hyperextend your elbow?
Not at all.
Never, because that's what you do. That's where the bones hit. But they say never hyperextend. Well, Paul Grilly, one of my main teachers, says a little phrase, never is never right, always is always wrong. Because as soon as you start to get these dogmatic statements, never or always, you're in the binary. Now, maybe you've got an injury and you've got some tenderness in your elbow. In that case, yeah, maybe don't completely hyperextend it, but you don't have to go to straight. You can back off a little bit. So my phrase is look for the nuance. And whenever you hear something that's an absolute, never hyperextend the elbow, never hyperextend the knees, that should send off little warning signals. Never. Well, never is never right. So where's the nuance in there? The nuance is it painful? If I want to increase strength, maybe I should bend the elbow or bend the knees. But why pick on you? Why not have the whole class micro bend the elbow?
Yeah.
And so they can all work on strength. So you got to look beyond just the black and white interpretations of the world. And that applies in a yoga practice and applies in life too. There are people who are politically very right-wing or people who are politically very left-wing and they hate the other side. They think you're either with me or you're against me. but there's a middle in there too somewhere. The analogy I use, I'm sure you've seen the Taijutsu symbol, the Taoist symbol of the two
Yes.
swirls, the black swirl against the white swirl. But inside the black swirl, there's a white dot. And inside the white swirl, there's a black dot. These represent yin and yang. But in life, nothing's absolutely yin or absolutely yang. It all depends on context and relationship. For instance, my shirt is black. So would you say it's yin or yang?
It depends.
Most people would say it's yin because it's black, but it's also high. My pants, you don't see them, my pants are white. So relative to position, my shirt is yang, but relative to color, my shirt is yin. So there's no absolutes. It all depends on context and relationship. And the same in life, when you hear people say, never do this or always do this, there's no nuance. There's no forgiveness. We always want to make black and white. And a lot of beginning yoga teachers want that too. Just tell me the one right way to teach down dog. It's like doctors, when they go through med school, they want to know, what's the one thing I do for heart problems? What's the one thing I do for cancer? What's one thing I do for asthma? And there is no one thing, because everybody is different. So you have to look beyond these binary things. There's no one right way to teach a pose. What you have to do is help your student find the way that that pose works for her.
Right. And in your experience, because I found that, you know, when teaching students, also very often they also have the same belief or the same approach. Like, why is my teacher asking me to experiment? You know, shouldn't there be like one correct pose? Shouldn't there be one prescribed look or belief? And how do we, as yoga teachers, begin to start educating our students, telling them that, you know, guiding them to begin to cultivate this sense of interoception, introspection inside their bodies?
Well, I think teaching them this little mantra, what are you feeling? Not how are you feeling, but what are you feeling? But to give you a little metaphor, imagine you've got a headache, and so you go to your doctor, and your doctor's running late today, and you go into the waiting room, and there's 19 other patients waiting for your doctor. So finally the doctor comes in and says to everyone in the waiting room, today we're all doing aspirin. Aspirin, 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 aspirin. And you think, hey, that's great. I've got a real bad headache. I need that. But beside you is a woman who's 6 months pregnant. And she's wondering, is aspirin going to be good for my baby? And beside her is someone with asthma. And they're thinking, aspirin's not going to do anything for me. I've got asthma. And beside that person is another one with an ulcer. And they're thinking, aspirin's going to really hurt my stomach. But the doctor just says, no, we're all doing aspirin. Now, you probably wouldn't go back to that doctor. You want the doctor to figure out what's happening with you. I don't care what these other patients are doing. What's happening with you? What's your problem? How can we cure it? Now, imagine you go to a yoga studio, and there's 19 other students, and in comes the teacher and says, today we're all doing sun salutations. And you think, I've been doing a lot of yin yoga lately. I need to move. That's going to be good for me. But beside you is a woman who's 6 months pregnant, and she's running sun salutes. Is up dog going to be good for my baby? And somebody else has got carpal tunnel syndrome. They're thinking, oh, that vinyasa is going to really hurt my wrist. And the teacher just says, we're all doing sun salutes. Now, you wouldn't go to that doctor who treats everyone the same. But in a yoga class, we don't really have a choice. We have 20 students. Rather than try to tell the 20 students what to do, I'd rather teach the students to become their own teachers. Say, okay, well, here's the pose, here's the intention of the pose. We're going to do down dog because we want to stretch out the back of the legs. Are you feeling it? What are you feeling? And if you're not feeling it, here's some options for you. Notice I didn't say how far the feet should be. I don't really care. I'm asking, what are you feeling? So you can guide them into the general shape of down dog. And then you can experiment. Try the feet together. Try the feet apart. Try the feet together with the toes out. Try the feet hip width apart. Same with the hands. Have the hands shoulder width apart. Now have them narrower, have them wider. Have the hands pointing out, have the hands pointing in. Whichever one feels solid, stable, secure, safe, that's for your down dog. And from now on, whenever I say down dog, you go to where it feels good for you. I don't have to tell them what to do. They experiment and they figure it out. Once they've done that once or twice, you don't need to keep doing it with them. Now they know every time they come to your class and I say down dog, okay, I'm gonna have my feet like this. I gotta have my hands wider than shoulder width because that feels good for my shoulders and good for my hips. And so this way you're teaching them to become their own teacher.
Right. And in your own experience, let's say thinking back to when you began as a new teacher, right? If you could revisit and go back in time and just speak to your old self, what is one piece of advice you would give yourself, or one thing that you wish you knew earlier as like a beginning yoga teacher?
Right. Well, I'm a type A personality, and it was all throughout my life and my business career. And I really believed in this Western saying we have of no pain, no gain. So you have to really push, you have to work. And the harder you work, the better your benefits are going to be. And if there's a little pain on the way, that's life. No pain, no gain. But that attitude doesn't work in yoga very well. My first year doing yoga, I was doing lotus pose, because that's a very advanced yoga pose. I wanted to get in there, and my knees hurt. And I just stayed. I stayed for about 2 minutes, and both knees were really in burning pain, but no pain, no gain. So I just stayed there. And when I came out, the pain didn't stop. So for years I was trying to fix. Basically broke my knees. I tore the meniscus in both knees by staying in the pose in pain. Later I was to learn that no pain, no pain. It's a proper saying. That's what they say in the East. And if you translate the Western saying of no pain, no gain into Sanskrit, it's rendered bullshit tihi. Bullshit. If you're in pain, stop doing what you're doing. Your body's trying to tell you you're damaging yourself in some way. So I wish I'd known then what I know now, which is once you start to feel even a little bit of pain, you have to back off, modify. Don't stay there. Because a little tweak, if you ignore it, becomes a big tweak. And a big tweak, if you know that, becomes an injury. You have to take time off. You can't go to your yoga studios anymore. Yoga teachers are laid off. Studios have to close down. So it's actually bad for the economy to not listen to your body and not listen to those little tweaks.
Right. And with regards to yoga teachers, right, I wanted to understand from your point of view, what differentiates like a good yoga teacher between a certified teacher and a good teacher, and a good teacher versus a great teacher, in your opinion, like based on your own journey and the teachers that you've encountered and like studied with?
Right. Well, every student is different, and all the teachers are different too. So a great teacher for one student may not be a great teacher for another student because of human variation.
Right.
We all have different ways of relating, reacting. We all come to the mat with different intentions. Some people come to the yoga mat because they're stressed out. They need to relax. Some people come because they have a restricted range of motion. Some people come because they're bored. Some people come because a friend brought them. Some people come because they want to learn to meditate more. There's all sorts of reasons why people come to the mat. I've heard some people come because it's a good way to meet women. Women, if you want to meet men, go take up golf. It's the same sort of ratio. But so who cares what brings people to the mat? But whatever that intention is, there's different teachers that may relate to that student better. Certainly you want a teacher who knows the stuff. Like just taking a 200-hour teacher training does not really qualify you to be a really good yoga teacher. Imagine you wanted to take guitar lessons and you found an ad in some website of a teacher who had just taken a 200-hour guitar course, and they've only played guitar for 200 hours, and they're going to teach you guitar. You probably would want a guitar teacher who's been playing for decades, or a piano teacher who's been playing for years and years and years, and knows the highest theory and so forth. So you'd want a teacher who's got a lot of experience in the practice, and then adds the ability to teach on top of that. So you look for that experience. 200 hours is an arbitrary number. Yoga Alliance just kind of picked that out of the air. Said, well, we think a month's worth of teaching should be good enough. That's about 200 hours, so let's call it that. Prior to Yoga Alliance, the way people learn to teach and become a teacher is by coming to class for years and years and years, and one day their teacher wasn't going to be there next week. And they said to you, you've been here for a long time, you know what I'm going to do, you teach next week, I'm on the way. And they would teach once in a while, and then they'd check in with the teacher. And so over the years, they'd kind of develop or fall into this gig of teaching. Well, that's not the way it is now. We have people who do yoga for 6 months, say, I like this, I'm going to become a teacher, take a 200-hour teacher course. And so now within a year, they're now teaching yoga. And maybe they're great. They could be, maybe they're a high school teacher anyway, and they already know how to teach. and they're in their 30s or 40s, so they got a lot of life experience. So even with just 200 hours, they might be a great teacher, but that's no guarantee. So you got to see the depth of practice the person has, but also how you can relate to it. Do you feel like you and the teacher are kind of on the same wavelength? Like I really gravitated to Paul Grilly because he's got a very scientific mind. He likes to look behind just the poses, look at the physiology and the energetics of it. And with Sarah Powers as well, another teacher of mine, she came from a Zen background, a meditation background as well. And so I could relate to these people. And they're similar ages to me too, so we had similar life experiences.
Right.
Well, there's no one right way, and as a teacher, you're not going to be able to please everybody. There's going to be some people that just won't relate to you, and that's fine. You got other people who will love what you do, and that's fine too. Share what your passion is, and the people that love it will follow you, and the people that don't, that's okay. They'll find another teacher.
Right. Thank you so much. That's really great. I mean, all that you've shared. I just have one last question, if you wouldn't mind sharing, because I know that you have an upcoming Yin Yoga training, and lots of your resources right now online are very focused on Yin Yoga. How has Yin Yoga influenced your own approach to practicing yoga? Do you practice Yang Yoga anymore? And with regards to Yin Yoga, why have you chosen to focus on this, as an offering to share with the world?
Okay. Well, as I said, I'm a very type A personality. I'm a Yangster by nature. And after I started doing yoga for a couple of years, I discovered flow and Vinyasa yoga. And then from that, I got into Ashtanga yoga. So I was doing Ashtanga Mysore practice every morning, 6 days a week for years and years and years. And I was starting to get into some repetitive stress injuries and some other problems. By the time I hit 50, even though I loved Ashtanga, it wasn't loving me anymore. It was an unrequited love. But that's the time when I met Sarah Powers and Paul Grilly and realized that I needed to add the other half to the practice. The yang practice was great, but I was burning out. I was only doing the active style. Once I started adding the slower, more mindful practice, ironically, it actually helped my yang practice. What stops us usually from getting deeper into a pose, before we hit the bones on the bones, that's the ultimate stopping. But often it's the connective tissue. It's the ligaments, the joint capsules, the tendons, the fascia in the body. And Yin Yoga stretches that out more effectively than Yang Yoga does. Yang Yoga is more for tightening up, strengthening. That's great. We need that. But Yin Yoga is more for relaxing these deeper tissues. So I found after 3 months of doing Yin Yoga, it was actually making my Yang Yoga practice deeper because it was increasing my range of motion. But it was also balancing. It was more the meditation practice. And as a type A yogi, I really needed to do that. So I still do yang and yin. You can't just do one or the other. It's like two sides of a coin. You can't just have a head. There's always a tail. And if you just always pay attention to the head, you're going to be off balance. So I mix it up. I'm about 50-50. 50% of the time I'm doing yang, 50% of the time I'm doing yin. So you kind of need that balance. As you get older, you may spend more time doing yin. Because as you get older, you tend to lose mobility faster than you lose strength. You still lose strength too, so you still need to do muscle building type activities, like a lot of push-ups and maybe handstands. I also swing kettlebells and do weights, and I also jog or do stairs for the heart. Because a lot of times in the Yang Yoga practice, you'll reach a plateau. You're only working with your own body weight, but then you plateau. Right. And if you use outside weights like dumbbells or kettlebells, you can get stronger. But then I have the yin to maintain my mobility, my flexibility. So you need both. You need a balance.
Okay.
Now, why I teach the yin? Well, when I first started teaching it, it really wasn't that well known. Paul Grilly and Sarah were still sharing it with the world. And I just thought, well, nobody's got yinyoga.com. So I thought I would just grab that URL. This is back in 2005. And at first I thought I'd give it to Paul Grilly, but he didn't want it because he already had his website was paulgrilly.com. So I got this URL and I thought, well, maybe I'll just put some stuff up there. And over the years, it just kept growing. But it wasn't that I had given up on yang. It's just there's so much yang in the world, people already knew about that, but not many people have known about the yin side. And so I just kept putting things into this website, all these resources there. And people asked me to give trainings, so I'd give trainings on it and just kind of grew. It wasn't a great plan, it just happened.
And I'm so thankful for the plan as well. Like the yinyoga.com is an amazing resource, and I'll be sharing this in the newsletter with our viewers as well. Yeah. Is there
Great,
anything
thank
else
you.
you would like to share with our viewers as an ending note, maybe a golden nugget, something that a tip on like how to improve their teaching or
Well, think of your students as pilots learning to fly their airplane, and you're, as a teacher, ground control. The student is in the airplane. They have to take command of that plane. You're not there beside them. You're not on the plane with them. So you have to teach them to fly the plane. You have to teach them to become their own pilot, if you will. So rather than tell them what to do, teach them how to figure it out themselves. And you start with this question: what are you feeling? Have an intention. Every time you put a student into a pose, have an intention. And you may not tell them, but in your mind, you know, okay, I'm doing this for this reason. But then if you do tell them and you ask them to pay attention, then it's like giving flying lessons. They're learning how to control their plane, their body. So teach the student to become their own teacher.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Bernie. It's been a pleasure having you on this expert interview.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. To find out more about Bernie and to receive his resources and possibly to learn more with him, and you can join Bernie through online courses. He has a live online 50-hour Yin Yoga teacher training, which is happening on the 2nd to the 8th of November with Yoga International. He also has a course on Yoga International, which is available for your viewing and training at any time. That's called Your Spine, Your Yoga. Bernie has authored several books, including From the Gita to the Grail, Yin Sides, The Complete Guide to Yin Yoga, Your Body, Your Yoga, as well as Your Spine, Your Yoga. You can subscribe to Bernie's website and his newsletter at yinyoga.com. And you can also check out his posts on Facebook, and it's Bernie Clark Yoga. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and see you again next week.